Wow, you're going really far down.
Game 7 incoming. This is what we live for. Nothing better than Game 7 in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, presented by Sticks.com. Katie Gauze, joined by Michael Tragos and Ryan Kennedy. Toronto Maple Leafs up against the wall with the season on the line. They get the 2-0 win down in enemy territory, beating the Florida Panthers. Series is tied. All right, guys. Lots to talk about, lots to break down. Feeling good, which is so funny. A few days ago, it was things are over. The jerseys were burning. We were planning the departures of basically the entire team. But we live to fight another day in terms of Toronto. So kick us off, Ryan. What did you see from the game? What is the difference in Game 5 and Game 6? And what are the feelings now for the Toronto fan base as they look forward to a Game 7 in what is going to be an absolute battle?
Indeed. I mean, first off, for the fan base, it's always a roller coaster, as it is for most fan bases. So they're going to live and die by those emotions and the highs and the lows. So, I mean, it's going to be a really fun atmosphere in Toronto. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of nerves for Leafs fans as well. But for the team itself in Game 6, for me, the big difference was patience. Like, they let the game come to them. They knew Florida would be swarming. There was a lot of good clears. I thought Joseph Woll helped a lot. You know, he's not like as adept at puck handling as Anthony Stolarz, but he made sure to get it to his D-men, so they had a little more time. We didn't see as many instances of Florida having sustained offensive zone pressure. It certainly happened a couple of times, but the Leafs didn't get burned. And I thought that, you know, they played the game that you have to play if you're going to beat the Panthers, which is you really have to wait for your opportunity. And you just have to make sure that you make the minimal amount of mistakes possible. And Toronto did that tonight.
Yeah. All right, Michael, what is your thoughts on this game before we dive into some of the headline stories, which include Joseph Woll's first career playoff shutout, Austin Matthews getting on the score sheet? There's a lot to discuss that went well for the Leafs in that regard tonight, but what did you see from the overall gameplay?
Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to focus on Austin Matthews. He finally checked into the series in a way that we were waiting on. You know, getting his first goal of the series. He had to wait till Game 6 to do it, but, you know, and it didn't come, or it came at the biggest moment and the time when the team needed it the most. So you saw with his celebration, Katie, like this was a massive relief. Like he might as well have done the whole, like, pull the monkey off the back and throw it away because, you know, this is, you know, I imagine going into Game 7, this is the kind of thing that you want. You want your best players feeling good about themselves and feeling like, all right, now I've scored. Okay, let's try to do it again because, you know, that was the narrative going into this is, you know, will Marner step up? Will Matthews step up? Will the core four actually come up and, you know, do what they hadn't done in Games 4 and 5? And, you know, we saw it tonight.
Well, and there was conversation leading up to this too about, you know, will there be changes? What's Craig Berube's game plan heading into this game? And talking a little bit about the vote of confidence that he gives by keeping Matthews and Marner's together, continuing to say, listen, like these guys, this is their moment. They need to step up. I believe in them, right? And hearing that from your head coach at this stage of the game, you know, especially when there is a lot of outside noise, there's a lot of pressure. And Craig Berube stuck to his guns. It did pay off tonight. You saw the feeds, the setups. These guys definitely did show up in a moment when they needed to.
Yeah, and you know what? I would add to that, Katie, that, you know, in Game 5, I know, you know, we were questioning Matthews' battle level and, you know, his will to go that extra mile. But something I noticed is as the minutes were ticking down, Florida had pulled their goalie already. You know, Matthews was on the ice. He had a chance to make a line change, but he kind of waved them off as if to say, like, no, like I'm gonna, you know, I still got gas in the tank. I can be a positive impact player defensively in my own zone. I want to kind of see this through. And I thought that was a great sign for him. And obviously this was after he had scored the goal, which ironically, of all the shots he's taken in the series, is probably one that Bobrovsky would like to have back. Getting beaten, along the ice as he did, sort of
Yeah,
five.
a lot of goalies have been beaten that way though by Matthews, right? Like that. That
Very
is
true.
true.
And you
shot.
know what? To be fair, Matthews, his signature is his release and how good he is at disguising it. So, maybe it was as much Matthews as it was, Bobrovsky missing it. So fair play there. But overall, I thought the effort was better from Matthews, and even Marner absorbed a lot of hits later in the game in order to get the puck out of his own zone or to keep the puck in the offensive zone. And like I said before, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but those are the things you can do to make a positive impact, even if it's not straight offense, which he is so prolific at as well.
Do you think the non-call on the high stick on Matthews, where he takes it right in the eye, like I thought, oh boy, is he even going to come back? Because it's one thing to get high stick, but on the replay, it looked like he actually scraped his eyeball, and I'm like, okay, that thing's going to be watering or it's scratched up, and Austin Matthews is going to come back with a Pirates patch and try to the game, but that seemed to motivate him, and then he gets the penalty for high sticking where he gets Ekblad. It was a legit high stick, but it's similar to Bobrovsky, don't wake the sleeping giant. I think the Florida Panthers might be regretting the fact that Austin Matthews, looked angry in this game.
Yeah, and well, those are also moments where, it's not necessarily an overt, oh, he's physically battling, but that is still battling, right? To come back, to not miss a beat, to be able to battle through it, to fight through adversity, to fight through an injury, whatever it is. I mean, that is a battle in and of itself. So I think, there was that emphasis from him tonight. Another element of this game that was important was the special teams, right? Granted, Toronto didn't cash in on their power play opportunities, but shutting down 4 for 4 on the PK for Florida, getting their power play opportunities and not getting anything out of it, which has been a good power play throughout this playoffs. A big piece, I think, for Toronto tonight. Maybe some of that credit or a lot of that credit gets put on the shoulders of Joseph Woll. Let's talk a little bit about his performance, right? First career playoff shutout. Again, a guy that, wasn't the person that started this series, right? Stolarz is still someone that we've seen a lot of great play from, but Woll not missing a beat. The tandem continues like we saw throughout the regular season. What can you say about his performance tonight?
Well, obviously your goaltender's got to be the best penalty killer, but
always.
And they showed the stat, Joseph Woll in elimination games, his save percentage was I think it hadn't dipped below .930.
Pretty good.
And he's played in something like 4 elimination games. So, that tells you a lot. The other thing I'll mention, Katie, is, Ryan and I were talking about this right before we went on. Block shots, 32 for Toronto, 10 for Florida. The guys in front of Joseph Woll really helped him out tonight. There was a play in the first period where Max Domi comes diving back and prevents, I think it was Sam Bennett from an open net. There was a great back check by Scott Lawton. There were a lot of instances where players were getting their sticks or bodies in front of shots, but 32 block shots, that's everything that a goalie wants.
Yeah. And I would also say too, to Woll's credit, Florida didn't have a ton of shots. I guess they probably ended with 18 or 19 or something like that. But a number of them were grade A opportunities. There was that period in the second where they just kind of had a few long shots that he stopped and froze. But other than that, a lot of Florida's opportunities were really dangerous. And, when you only face 2 actual shots in the first period, that can be tough on a goaltender because you want to feel the puck early on. And, the Panthers did have their pressure, but it's not really the same. So for Woll to be able to make stops after not necessarily facing any for a while or and actually getting a feel for the puck, I thought that was sort of an added degree of difficulty for him in getting that shutout.
Well, here's another kind of we talked a lot about the differences in the series. I think the last show we did, I said flat out, what changed? And the answer from games 1 and 2 to games 3 and 4 and 5 was the Florida Panthers. So is that partially the answer again here tonight? Because while we did see good efforts from Toronto and they were doing things a lot better, it did kind of feel like we were seeing a little bit of that game 1 and game 2 Panthers team in a way too, in terms of looking a little bit tired, not quite playing the game that we expect to see, not quite being as relentless and aggressive and just nonstop in your face. Did you guys get that sense tonight?
Yeah, it's so weird. Like hockey is such a game of momentum, and
Yeah.
it's so funny how the momentum shifts can swing so wildly. Where Ryan was talking about last year's final and how Edmonton blew out the Panthers in Game 6, and then Game 7, it's like the Panthers just
Yeah.
punched back, and it very much this series is kind of taken on that tenor where like Toronto
Yeah.
first 2 games, it looked like all right, they're gonna wrap this thing in 4. And then after Game 6, you're like, oh boy, Toronto's never going to win another game, period. So, what I saw tonight was, players willing to make the sacrifice. Let's talk about Matthew Nyes a bit here. Obviously,
Right.
gets a reverse hit from Mikkola and, was never the same after that.
Yeah.
But, he may have missed a few shifts here and there, but he never really left the game for good. I think that really kind of fed into the rest of the team. Like I said, we saw players taking the body. That one hit by Simon Benoit was just massive. I know Florida out hit Toronto, but that might have been the biggest hit of the game. So, I think I saw a Toronto team that just looked hungry and looked desperate and looked like they didn't want the season to end.
Yep.
I would say, I mean, my kind of take on Florida tonight was like in general, when you're playing the Panthers in the playoffs, they're almost saying to you, like, we're going to make you beat yourself, right?
Mhm.
Like, we're going to,
Yeah.
we're going to make you play at a high level. We're going to put you under pressure. When you make mistakes, we're going to make you pay for them. And it's almost like tonight they were waiting for the Leafs to make mistakes and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, okay, well, I guess instead of beating yourself, you're just going to beat us.
Yeah.
It's
Like, you don't
there
make
wasn't a
mistakes.
lot of,
You.
yeah, there wasn't a lot of dynamism from the Panthers. And, and again, they had some grade A chances against Woll that they couldn't convert. But it didn't seem like once they pulled Bobrovsky at the end, they didn't seem super dangerous. Like it didn't feel like, oh, they're going to get one for sure. And then they're going to have to scramble for the second one. It felt a lot more kind of like, just kind of level, like, okay, like Toronto's going to get they're going to clear it out a bit. And obviously the Panthers were putting on the pressure, but for whatever reason, they just didn't have their sticks in the right places tonight. Whereas in the past, we've seen it where, there's a scramble or a bouncing puck, and whether it's Bennett or Verhaeghe or Marchand, like they managed to get good wood on it at exactly the right time.
Well, from the second period on, this felt like a first goal, first team to score a goal is going to win the game.
That was like the first note that I wrote when we were putting my notes in the rundown. I was like, score first. This is so big.
Yeah.
Well, Florida's so dangerous when they do score first. Like to Ryan's point, like they really rely on that first goal. And then they just, they've got Barkov, they've got Reinhart, they got Bobrovsky. They've got a team that can shut it down better than anyone out there. So it was imperative for Toronto to get the first goal. But, with all those power plays Florida was getting, missed opportunities for sure.
Yeah, I know. You both make good points. And Ryan, I really do like your point because, just being that this was the Leafs and being that there's just this history there and this just unfortunate nature of how things go, watching those final couple of minutes with the net empty, I was just like, I'm way more calm than I should be because this is like normally I was like, I actually feel really good about them winning this game. And I wasn't really, there was no point where I was like, oh man, here it comes. Like, I'm really worried. This is going to be it. Like, I was just very relaxed. And again, like, I have no stake in this. I'm not rooting for really anyone, but it was just like, Toronto feels okay. And it was more just Florida was just not themselves. And I definitely think that throughout the game, we noticed they did a really good job of breaking. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Leafs heading into this game 7. So the Leafs have scored 1 goal in each of their last 4 game 7s. Great comment here. Will
Just
things
1 goal?
look different this time? Yeah.
Surely that's a typo.
No.
Well, they'll put Nick Robertson back in the lineup and he'll get 1 because that's what happens every time Nick Robertson doesn't play a game, right? So they're guaranteed 1 goal if they put Nick Robertson in. all joking aside, I expect it'll be one of those low scoring game sevens. And I almost feel like both teams will be happy with that. Like, even though we know Toronto to be a high scoring team, and we've seen Florida obviously pile up goals in game 5, I kind of feel like Toronto will look at game 6 and say, okay, this is the template. And we will have a little more of an edge because we will have last change and we will have the crowd behind us. And, hopefully we get more power plays, or at least even power plays, whereas they had the deficit of power plays in game 6. So I wouldn't be surprised if like 2 goals gets the job done in game 7 for whichever team wins.
Boring. No, I want to see a
I
high
know.
scoring game. Come
I
on.
know.
I want to see lead changes and maybe a 3-1
7-5.
blown lead.
All right. Well, we just had a great comment. I liked it. Austin Matthews getting on the score sheet. What took so long? And I know we've talked about this, but is there something tonight about the game itself, or just what you saw from him, that maybe just lended itself to him being a little bit more offensively involved and offensively productive?
Yeah, not really. Like, I think he's
Yeah.
playing the same game that he's been playing
Just
all
needed it.
series. How many goals does Matthew Tkachuk have? Like, he's also been struggling to get on the score sheet.
He
Connor
was
McDavid
pretty
only has
quiet
3
tonight.
goals in these playoffs. So,
Yeah.
it's I know we keep looking at Rantanen, and what he's doing out there is just unreal. But let's be
Right.
fair, not everyone is Mikko Rantanen in the playoffs right now. Like, it is
Yeah.
kind of hard. Like, most of the games are low scoring. I still believe there's probably something wrong with Matthews. Like, I know he gets that shot away and it's like he's back, but is he really back? Because, the Austin Matthews that I'm used to seeing at the top of his level can control the game, can take over a game. And it
Mhm.
just feels like he's more human than superhuman these days.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's fair.
I don't know if he is hurt. I feel that's like always the excuse, and sometimes it's true. Where
Something's
he'll
wrong with him, Ryan. He can't be this ordinary. Come on.
Well, it's funny because it's like, is he down a gear? Like, I don't know if he is. And, on his goal, he finally got a little bit of time and space, right? And that's like anytime you ask any, you know, great two-way forward or any defenseman, or, like any shutdown defenseman in the NHL, it's like, how do you stop so and so? It's like, take away time and space. I just think Florida's done a pretty great job of doing that on Matthews, and they slipped up tonight once and he made them pay for it.
Yeah.
And he has had probably some pretty bad shooting luck, but I still think he can elevate a bit more. And I think he could, build off this game 6. And as you mentioned earlier, play a bit more angry.
All right. Well, kind of keeping an eye on what's going on in the Twitter world here, getting an idea of what's being said from Craig Berube as he does his post-game press conference. And it's looking like he said he isn't sure if Matthew Nyes will be healthy enough to
Ooh,
play game 7. That would be
yeah.
huge. Again, we're not sure, but talk a little bit just from a speculation standpoint about what kind of a hit that would be for Toronto.
He's their best forward right now.
Yeah.
And, I say that knowing how good William Nylander has been, like 6 goals, 15 points for Nylander. And, Matthew Nyes has just been on the score sheet good, on the forecheck good. He's that one player that I think Florida looks at and says, okay, I don't have to worry about Marner is going to hit me. I don't have to worry about Nylander is going to hit me. Even
Right.
Matthews is not going to hit me. But if 23 is on the ice, you got to have your head on a
Right.
swivel. And, that is a huge loss.
Yeah. He's been
Yeah,
noticeable every night.
for sure. And I think, the only kind of silver lining here is that Bobby McMahon had probably his best game of the series
Yeah.
He did,
tonight,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
he got a little more responsibility once Nyes was clearly hurt.
Yeah.
And, he gets an assist on the Pacioretty goal. And, with McMahon, I know Berube has kind of been coaching him up all season because he is a big body and he is fast. He's faster than a lot of players realize, I think.
Yeah.
And so he can get in on the forecheck. So I think, in game 7, if Nyes is not available, I think you'll see a lot more of McMahon and Pacioretty in the top 6 and playing that Nyes-esque role. I mean, Pacioretty's already been doing it,
Yeah.
but those guys have to be the ones that are first in on the forecheck, using their body, trying to create time and space for their line mates. And again, maybe Nick Robertson slots in on a lower line and can provide some secondary offense.
How good has Pacioretty been too? Oh my
Oh,
God.
amazing.
You just took
Like,
my next question. I was going to say, I mean, we got 3 goals from him and 3 goals from Matthews. One of them is making a whole lot of money. One of them is making $873K and change.
Yep.
He's been
he's
excellent.
been sneaky. Like, I don't know if there should be an award. I know there's the Conn Smythe for playoff MVP, but there should be one for the guy who comes out of nowhere and has been in like a role player or a bit time player, and then all of a sudden just for 2 months or 2 weeks he just kind of like becomes a superstar. And Pacioretty's been that guy in this playoffs.
Well, look at the stat. Great producer stat here. 8 goals in 15 career playoff games when facing elimination. So,
Wow.
Pacioretty, pressure, it's nothing for him. And we saw that tonight. I mean, that's another crucial player. And again, if you do lose a guy like Nyes, you're going to need players like that to step up. All right, I got a few more questions for you guys, but a reminder that the Playoff Frenzy Live is presented by Sticks.com. Don't break the bank on sticks when you can get a pro level composite stick without the pro level price tag. Check out Sticks.com. That is STIX.com. All right, so at this point, heading into a game 7, if I'm in the locker room, somebody is asking the cliche question, but it is a good question. Okay, what's it going to take? What did we learn from this game 6 for both teams that is going to be the X factor in terms of winning a game 7? What do we want to see?
Oof.
What did you like? What didn't you like? It just what is it going to take? Let's start with what's it going to take for Florida, then let's talk about what it would take for Toronto. Ryan?
For Florida, I think they have to kind of lock in on Panthers hockey, continue to be punishing on the forecheck, continue to pressure Toronto's defensemen, and get that extended offensive zone time, those cycles where you're causing a lot of confusion and you're creating chances for some of your skilled forwards. They've certainly done it before in this series, so they just have to kind of, I'll say, get back to it, because they didn't do it as much in game 6, but it's all about that pressure, knowing that, the next series is on the line, and they would have a chance to go back to back, which is pretty incredible these days.
All right, Michael. So what's it going to take for Toronto?
They got to exercise those demons, Katie. Like, it's
Stop.
not a Maple Leaf season unless it ends in a Game 7 collapse. So
Oh, Lord.
maybe they can exercise those demons finally. And I think the way to do it is, we talked about it already, but the sacrifice, like they have to be able to give hits but also receive hits. They've got to be able to block a lot of those shots. Joseph Woll, ultimately he's going to have to outplay Sergei Bobrovsky. It looks like the Leafs are comfortable with him in net. I don't think there's going to be any talk about, if Stolarz is healthy, do you consider putting him into game 7? I wouldn't, not at this stage. As good as Stolarz was when he was healthy, Woll, he's been every bit as good this season, and his playoff numbers suggest that the Leafs should be comfortable with him in net. So, a strong game by Woll, but then, stay out of the box and just be able to kind of, take one for the team.
Yeah, I mean, if we were coming off that last game where he gets pulled, then maybe there's a different conversation. But I think at this stage, with Stolarz still obviously not being quite where he needs to be at to even be on this trip, you got to keep riding with Woll. I think you got to do it. All right, so let's just look into the future a little bit here, because one thing that I was seeing a lot of people discussing, and I think it's an interesting storyline, is whoever comes out of this series, whether it is Toronto or it is Florida, 7 games is a toll. I mean, these guys are getting beat up. Does Carolina have a bit of an advantage out of the gate here, facing whichever team makes it through this bit of a series? It's been a little bit of a gauntlet.
I think the winner of game 7 goes to the Stanley Cup final.
Okay, so they're just riding that momentum then.
Yeah, I think there's another level. Like, I don't think Carolina or even Washington, I don't think they're on the same level as the teams in the Atlantic this year.
Just based on, I mean, maybe even based on the playoff series that they've had so far, right? In terms of the battles.
Yeah, well, everyone's going to be beaten up. And I hear what you're saying. Like, I know Carolina's probably not walking around with ice packs attached to like all their limbs. Toronto's probably like, if not all, it seems like everyone's probably hurting to some degree. But, I just still think that when I look at the Carolina Hurricanes and I look at the Florida Panthers or even the Toronto Maple Leafs, I give the edge every day to the Panthers and Leafs.
Yeah,
I agree. I think Carolina could win game 1 of whoever they play, simply because they're going to be more rested. But I would say like Carolina hasn't faced any adversity yet. Like New Jersey was easy, Washington was easy,
Right.
and the rest is nice. But will they be able to jump up to that next level? And it's going to be very interesting because if they play Florida, then, we were talking to Drew Shore on the big show the other day about it. He talked about Carolina, how fast they play, how they like to rim it around the boards, how it's just constant chaos. Well, that's Florida, but they do it with heaviness instead of speed. It's,
Right.
the constant pressure, the forechecking, causing turnovers. So Florida can handle that. They know that game.
Yeah.
If it's Toronto that they play, then Toronto's going to look at Carolina and be like, oh yeah, we just did that. we faced that, but harder.
Right.
Right. So it's basically like, okay, well, we'll just do what we did against Florida and we should win in 6.
Yeah,
And they're going to be facing Freddie Anderson, who they have probably scored 1 million goals on in practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fair point. And it does feel like, again, there's something to be said for the rest and for maybe not being beat up. But I think there's something much more to be said for being battle tested, playing hard series, playing higher level that, just I don't necessarily think Carolina has had to reach yet because they've had a little bit of an easier path. And an easy path is great because if it gets you there, like, good for you. But at the end of the day, what do you need to win it? All right, here's another path that hasn't been easy because I want to touch on the other game that we have going on tomorrow with the Winnipeg Jets and the Dallas Stars. Dallas leading 3-2, game 6 at 8:00 Eastern time. This is an interesting battle as well because now we are seeing the Winnipeg Jets go back on the road. Does this feel like this could be it? Because, genuinely, this series is basically come and go based on who's at home because of Connor Hellebuck. What are we expecting? Is this series going to be over?
I kind of feel like it will be. And I think
You
I
were
said
right about
this.
Edmonton last night.
Yeah. I mean, I think I said this earlier this week. Like I thought Winnipeg would probably win game 5 at home. And then game 6 will be their Waterloo. And I don't think it's all on Hellebuck, but that difference, that confidence that they have at home is not there in Dallas, where you have a raucous crowd and you have a really good Dallas Stars team that has great depth, that has amazing goaltending. I thought the Jets played fantastic in game 5. They did exactly what they needed to do, and Hellebuck did exactly what he needed to do. But ultimately, like the Stars, like they just don't lose 2 games in a row. It's like that's not their thing.
They don't.
I don't know. I hope Winnipeg wins it. I want to see Winnipeg Edmonton so bad.
You do?
It would be cool.
I really do.
Literally.
All Canadian conference final. I think that'd be kind of interesting. The travel for those guys would be real easy too.
Boom.
But
True.
Connor Hellebuck, I imagine the splits just don't make any sense. It's not like
It's true.
anything's different on the road. It's not like this is baseball where it's a different stadium or whatever. I think it's a coincidence more than anything. I think what we saw in the last game was Connor Hellebuck, trying to prove his detractors wrong. It feels like every time we count this guy out, he does come up with a big game, especially in these playoffs. So I'm hoping that we extend the series and we go back to Winnipeg.
Well, again, as it stands right now, with Toronto still in the mix, there is this small possibility that we could see an all-Canadian Cup final. I have to do some research. When's the last time that happened? Obviously, it's been a minute.
Calgary, Montreal.
Yeah.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, here we go. We've got one more question. I want to get into this. We talked about Austin Matthews. This is a big step, and maybe this is just the beginning of something. It'll remain to be seen. But does Austin Matthews go off in game 7 or what? Because that's what the people want to know. Is it happening? He's going to go off his big, what is it? Poppy? Is Poppy back?
I think he'll score in game 7. I think he'll get at least one. Might even be the first goal of the game. What happens after that? Who knows?
Yeah, I think Austin Matthews is still searching for his definitive Toronto Maple Leafs moment. Like I remember Doug Gilmour, he had his moment, Ryan, was it the wraparound goal on Cujo against the Blues?
Yep.
From that right now, what is Austin Matthews' Leaf moment? It's probably literally his debut game where he had 4 goals against the Ottawa Senators. Yep. If your franchise moment is, your first regular season game, that's not good enough. So I'm hoping that, I'm not hoping, I'm expecting him to go off in game 7. What does go off mean? Does it score another important goal? If that's what it takes, then, he's due for it. And, it's about time the Leafs get past the second round.
I like it. All right, last question before we wrap this up and preview what game 7 is going to look like. We talked a lot about in the last show after the disappointing loss. So let's just break up the core four. Forget it. It's over. How do things change, if anything? I mean, do we start to retract some of those statements? Do we start to feel a little differently if all of a sudden those guys do show up? If game 7 is big, what if they go on a run? What if all of a sudden they do make it to the cup final? Are we taking that back, or do we still sort of feel that way? I mean, that's what we talked about the whole time, right? Is if they can prove themselves, even though it's been a less than ideal road in certain moments with some of these losses, do they still have the opportunity to earn back all of the lack of trust that we have sort of had in them leading up to this moment?
I was thinking about this. I was thinking like
What do they
how
have to
far do the
do?
Leafs have to go? Well, how far do the Leafs have to go until we say, okay, now, I would bring Mitch Marner back? Like,
Right.
is it reaching the conference final? Is it, do they have to win a cup? Is it good enough if they just make it to the Stanley Cup final? It feels like they have to get past round 2.
Yes.
Even if Marner has a great game in game 7, I still think there's going to be a fan base and management going, all right, we still didn't get past the second round. Like, what are we doing? We're going to roll it back again. So for me, I think they have to get to the conference final, or, all bets are off in terms of breaking this core 4 up.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And I think their performances in game 7 will go a long way in determining that. Like, let's say Matthews and Marner play amazing in game 7, but the Leafs lose a close one. That's probably the worst case scenario, where you're like, they were really close and they played well, but it just didn't work out for us. I think the better case scenario is almost like, even if they're not the Stars, if they get by Florida, then at least you say, like, look, we got down to the Final Four. It's really tough to even get to the final, but we beat the Florida Panthers, and they were the defending champs. I think it's probably enough, but ideally you want to at least get to the final, win or lose, and then you can be like, how much more do you want from these guys? Like, they at least got there.
Yeah. I mean, if you made it to the dance, the final showdown, then you got to give them some credit, because again, this is a team that has, basically been like stuck on round 2. If you make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final, give them some credit. All right, well, we'll find out. All of these questions will be answered on Sunday night, game 7 between the Panthers and the Maple Leafs at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It'll be on TNT, and we will all be back to break it down. The highs, the lows. Will there be tears? Will there be joy? Depends on who you're rooting for. We will see. But that does it for the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. Katie Gauze, Michael Tracos, and Ryan Kennedy, thank you for joining us. Enjoy tomorrow night's Game 6 between Dallas and Winnipeg, and we will see you back for playoff hockey discussions very soon. Good night.